Thursday, it's the 12th of June. You're watching ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Live from Seoul, I'm Kwang-yong. Now, President Park Geun-hye has replaced 4 of her senior secretaries earlier today. The president named a gender equality minister and former ruling Saenuri Party lawmaker Cho Yoon-sun as her secretary for political affairs. The presidential office expects Cho's experiences in both parliament and the government to help her act as a bridge between the two sides. Ruling party lawmaker An Chong-bum was named Secretary for Economic Affairs. The financial and welfare expert played a key role in devising the president's election pledges. Now, former prosecutor Kim Yong-han was appointed Secretary for Civil Affairs, and citing his contributions to establish law and order, the presidential office expects Kim to restore discipline in public service and to deliver public opinion to the president. And last but not least, former president of Seoul National University of Education, Kwang-yong, was appointed Secretary for Education and Culture. Song's career-long focus on personality-based education and fostering creativity were cited as he will lead the government's education reforms and policies to achieve cultural prosperity. Now, getting to President Park Geun-hye's second pick to be her new prime minister. He has found himself embroiled in controversy, just like the president's first nominee did. Now, some controversial comments made by Moon Chang-guk a couple of years ago have surfaced and are casting doubts about his confirmation at Parliament. Cho Yoon-sun reports.
During a lecture at his church 3 years ago, Prime Minister nominee Moon Chang-guk said Japan's forced colonization of the Korean peninsula in the early 20th century was part of God's will to awaken the Korean people. He added that God also divided the two Koreas, saying that if the Korean peninsula had been an independent state at the time, the South would have settled on communism. At a lecture the following year, the nominee put his ultra-right views on display again, saying Korea was able to enjoy economic development by adopting technologies from Japan during the colonial era, and that it was a geopolitical blessing from God. Moon also denied that Korea's liberation from Japan was because of the people's independence movement, saying instead that liberation was granted to Koreans by the will of God. In response, ruling Saenuri Party floor leader Lee Hwan-gu said he believed the comments were not ill-intended and that the nominee was trying to say that Korea as a nation should learn from past mistakes and move forward. The opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy had a decidedly different reaction. They called the nominee's comments anti-national and outrageous and said President Park should immediately withdraw his nomination and apologize to the public for another failed personnel appointment. Moon Chang-guk's representatives in a statement say the comments are being misinterpreted since broadcaster KBS has only aired portions of them. Cho Yoon-sun, ARIRANG News.
Now, a day after the floor leader of the ruling party gave a keynote speech to the National Assembly, it was the main opposition party's turn on this Thursday. Most of the focus was on the Seoul ferry disaster and on ways to make sure a similar tragedy never happens again. But there was more, and here's our Kim Young-gil.
Addressing a full National Assembly on Thursday, Park Geun-hye, floor leader of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, called once again for a thorough investigation into April's ferry disaster.
An investigation without boundaries is the order from the people. The very first task for the National Assembly in the second half of the year is to conduct a thorough probe into the Seoul ferry tragedy.
Park made a case for comprehensive reforms in the government and parliament, saying failures in the government system were one of the causes of the accident. She also sounded the alarm about the nation's aging nuclear power plants.
A nuclear power plant disaster is like an atomic bomb. The nuclear industry has been tarnished with corruption scandals, which sets the stage for a major accident like the ferry disaster.
The main opposition floor leader called for anti-corruption bills targeting high-ranking government officials to be swiftly passed at the National Assembly. She said that Korea's bureaucrats have long enjoyed landing jobs after retirement at companies and public institutions, which has contributed to the lax management of safety regulations. Park also pledged that the main opposition alliance would make Korea a better place to live by reducing youth unemployment, household debt, and the growing social income gaps. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
Well, North Korea and Japan have been cozying up of late, but the United States says Washington and Tokyo still agree on the fundamental importance of a nuclear-free North Korea. U.S. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki said Wednesday that the chief nuclear envoys from the two nations held very productive discussions this week in Washington on a wide range of issues related to North Korea. Now, she said the meetings reflected the close cooperation between the U.S. and Japan in denuclearizing Pyongyang in a peaceful manner. Psaki refrained from commenting on Japan's thawing ties with North Korea, but added Washington remains in close consultations with all of the members of the six-party denuclearization talks. Now, on a different note, the 2014 United Nations Public Service Forum Day and Awards ceremony kicks off on June 23rd here in Korea, during which hundreds of people will share their public services experience. Now, organizers said at a press briefing Thursday that the four-day forum is one of the three biggest international events taking place in the nation this year. About 1,000 participants from some 100 countries are expected to participate, and 19 organizations will be awarded for outstanding services.
This year's UN Forum will focus on the theme of innovating governance for sustainable development and well-being of the people. And Korea has been regarded as a leader in public service areas. And this will be a good opportunity for us to promote our national image.
Now, Korea will use the event to tout its e-government systems and new 새마을 운동 movement, which has been revived to enhance a community spirit to improve living standards.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Kwang-yong, every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Well, across the globe, for the second time in 2 days, Islamist militants have seized control of another Iraqi city. They're getting closer to the nation's capital of Baghdad. The Iraqi government is now expressing its openness to have U.S. airstrikes help them hold back the insurgency. We turn to our Kim Hyun-bin.
Islamist militants have claimed another city in Iraq, the second this week, one day after taking control of Iraq's second city of Mosul on Tuesday. Militants from the ISIL, an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, overran the city of Tikrit, which lies just 150 kilometers north of Baghdad. And the militant group promises more attacks to come. In a 17-minute audio recording released Thursday, a spokesman for the ISIL threatens more fighting in Iraqi cities, including in the capital, Baghdad. Authorities have not been able to confirm the authenticity of the tape or when it was recorded. The turn of events represents a huge blow to Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's attempt to fend back the insurgency, which has made massive strides since U.S. troops left the country last year. He also took aim at the security personnel who fled the city of Mosul instead of defending their posts.
I am saying this is a conspiracy because the numbers of Al-Qaeda and ISIL forces could not have confronted the army and police forces that were located there. But what has happened? And how have the military units collapsed?
The U.S. has pledged appropriate assistance to help the Iraqi government and security forces. The New York Times on Wednesday reported that Prime Minister Maliki secretly asked the Obama administration to conduct airstrikes on al-Qaeda militant targets in Iraq.
We are working with Iraqi leaders from across the country to support a coordinated response. You can expect that we will provide additional assistance to the Iraqi government to combat the threat from.
During his trip to Greece on Tuesday, Iraqi Foreign Minister Hashar Zebari said his fellow leaders must unite to face a mortal threat. Zebari added that Baghdad will work with forces from Kurdistan to drive the fighters out of Mosul. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
Well, the long wait is nearly over for football fans all around the world. We're just hours away now from the start of the 2014 FIFA World Cup in Brazil. Of course, the protests and construction woes will be set aside for the next 4 weeks as the world shifts its collective attention to the football pitch. The first game features host country Brazil taking on Croatia in Group A action. And the Korean squad arrived in Brazil on Wednesday to a crowd of cheering supporters who hope the team has found a way out of their rut. Now, the 23-man squad struggled to get the ball in the net during recent friendlies, but head coach Hong Myung-mo says his team had left their recent disappointments behind and enters the World Cup with high hopes. Korea's first game against Russia is on June 17th at 7 a.m. Korea time. Korea's central bank has left its key rate unchanged at 2.5% for the 13th straight month in June, as it believes the domestic economy is still not on track to a strong recovery. Now, it came following its monthly monetary policy meeting earlier today. The Bank of Korea said that slumping private consumption due to the ferry disaster in April is slowing the pace of the nation's economic recovery. But the bank went on to say that exports did remain strong, with the global economy keeping up with its moderate pace of recovery. Now, Governor Lee Ju-yeol had told reporters earlier that a rate hike would only come after the economy is on path to a steady recovery, but ruled out the possibility of a rate cut. The country's inflation rate ran below the bank's target band for the 24th straight month in May, standing at 1.7%. However, the Korean won continues to gain strength, and the country's export prices fell to their lowest level in over 6 years last month. Now, this trend is likely to prevail for the time being, and the nation's exporters are taking a hit. Our Yoo explains.
Korean exporters saw their profitability decline for the third straight month in May, as export prices fell to their lowest level since December 2007. The figure stood at 86.8, which is a drop of 1.6% from the previous month, according to the Bank of Korea. That means exporters were earning that much less when shipping out the same amount of products. The drop is attributed to the strengthening Korean won. The won rose 2% against the greenback last month, when Korea posted a sizable current account for the 26th straight month. Foreign stock investors also helped push the value of the won higher, as they brought the Korean currency to buy local shares seen as safe investment. Experts say the won is expected to keep strengthening against the dollar in coming months, given that the United States has no plan to increase interest rates anytime soon. Even then, they don't see any major decline in the country's exports.
A growing number of exporters, particularly conglomerates, have grown largely immune to currency fluctuations. And research results since 2000 show that the country's exports are not negatively affected by exchange rate changes. So I don't see much immediate impact on exports from a stronger won.
Hall adds, however, it's a different story for export-dependent small to medium-sized companies, whose profitability has worsened since the global financial crisis in 2008. That could signal a widening gap between mid-sized businesses and conglomerates. Yoo-rian, ARIRANG News.
Well, perception doesn't always match up with reality, and that holds true for the perception of the middle class living in Korea. Now, fewer Koreans feel that they belong to the middle class, and a survey of more than 800 people conducted by the Hyundai Research Institute shows that Koreans believe you're a member of the middle class if you earn about $5,000 a month and own a house of over 115 square meters in size. Well, that wasn't the definition in Korea, where the average middle class household, between them, the respondent had a median monthly income of about $4,000 and owns a house totaling about 70 square meters. So the Research Institute said the Korean society needs to close the gap between perception and reality by improving the general quality of life, both in socio and economic standards. Well, nearly 87% of Koreans went on trips within the country last year, and that is a rise of about 1.3 percentage points compared to the year before. And this is according to an annual survey conducted by the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism and the Korea Culture and Tourism Institute. Now, the number of times and days a person traveled in the nation both rose, but the average amount of money spent decreased by roughly 20,000 won. That's about $20 US. And the most popular destination for domestic travelers was Gyeonggi province in the north, in the western part of the country, followed by the capital, Seoul. Now, travelers were most satisfied with their trips to Korea's southernmost island of Jeju. 2 Korean airlines have been grounded temporarily for violating safety regulations. The Transportation Ministry on Thursday issued a 5-day flight suspension for budget carrier E-Star Jet for ignoring a warning signal on the plane's gate during a flight in January. Now, the move comes a day after the ministry fined Asian Airlines $20,000 and ordered them to suspend all flights from Incheon to Saipan for 7 days. Now, back in April, the pilots of an Asiana passenger flight ignored an engine error warning and continued flying for 4 hours instead of rerouting to a nearby airport. And authorities say this is the first time an airline in Korea has had flights suspended over safety violations without there having been a real accident. Well, Korea is pretty much considered a paradise for smokers with its super cheap cigarette prices and lack of serious anti-smoking policies. But this might not be the case if the nation's health ministry gets its way. With hopes to cut the high smoking rate in Korea, the government is mulling over ways to make a pack of cigarettes a whole lot more expensive and much less attractive. Connie Kim has this report.
The Korean government is preparing new anti-smoking legislation to bring down the nation's high smoking rate. A European Union study last year found Korea's smoking rate at second highest among OECD members, barely trailing Greece. The Health Ministry said Thursday that it'll submit a revised bill to the National Assembly requiring tobacco companies put graphic health warnings on packs of cigarettes. Currently, written health warnings are only printed on the packs. Just a day earlier, the ministry said it'll push to raise taxes on cigarettes, taking in the World Health Organization's recommendations that urge members to raise cigarette taxes to 50%. The price of a pack of cigarettes in Korea has remained the same for 10 years or so, at about $2.5 US, the lowest in the OECD. The ministry also plans to roll out new anti-smoking ad campaigns by the end of the month. The government has made a number of moves to reduce the number of smokers in the past, but they haven't been successful. Just 2 years ago, a bill that would have required graphic visual warnings about the health effects of smoking was opposed by the Economy and Finance Ministry due to concerns about falling revenue. As a recent report by the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs shows, Korea has a way to go in strengthening its anti-smoking policies. Out of 27 countries surveyed, Korea ranked 25th in terms of actively pursuing non-smoking policies. However, the health ministry is pushing hard to ensure graphic health warnings will be carried on cigarette packs before the year is out. More than 50 countries already have or are in the process of requiring picture warnings be printed on cigarette packs. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
The global population today stands somewhere around 7.1 billion, and the number of vehicles running on fossil fuels like gasoline, diesel, and LPG exceeds 1 billion. Do the math, and on average, 1 out of every 7.1 people owns and drives a car around the world. But do we know how our car's fuel supply system works? I personally don't. What I do know is that my car does emit carbon dioxide every time I drive to work, and imposing what's called a carbon tax on vehicles has become a hot button issue here in Korea in recent days. I think we should look into this issue. Of course, Dr. Kim Byung-ju joins me live in the studio for an in-depth discussion. Dr. Kim.
Yes.
So what I do know is that CO2 emissions from my car is bad, a key cause of air pollution here in this country or around the world. What I'm finding out today is that these gas emissions, when exceeding the permissible limits, mean a wasteful use of fuel. So I'm losing money on that. And something called a low carbon vehicle fund is meant to address this, but we're witnessing a rare, fierce fighting within the government, infighting over the introduction of this bill.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's like, global citizens' responsibility to reduce or minimize the emission of carbon gases, greenhouse gases, and we know that. And in Korea, we have this goal of reducing Korea's greenhouse gas emission by 30%, business as usual by year 2020. And one of the key vehicle to achieve, through which we'll achieve this, is indeed discouragement of car owners from owning cars that emits lots of greenhouse gas here and carbon gas here, CO2s here. And the government is introducing a new system, and it's causing a lot of controversy here in Korea. Let's talk about the new system, what it looks like. Let's bring it up on the screen to explain. Basically, those cars with larger size of CO2 emissions, here the plus is meaning that they'll get to pay more in terms of their purchasing cost, because that will be kind of like a form of tax that government will have to impose on those larger size CO2 emitting vehicles. And if you go down that list right there, there's a neutral zone where the users or buyers of these cars with this size of CO2 emissions will not be affected. And if you go further down, like hybrid cars and electric cars and so on, if you buy those vehicles, actually your cost of purchase will be reduced because you will be receiving subsidy from the government, the money coming down from the top to bottom layer here. So that's the overall idea. This is a tentative plan, and Korean government is talking about different ways of going with this. And according to the law that exists in place, Korean government has to introduce systems starting from January 1st next year. So this is very tight in terms of time-wise, but there is a big disagreement inside the country.
So how serious is that disagreement?
The disagreement is one of the most serious one I've ever seen in my career here, indeed.
Really?
Very, very serious, because, I mean, we have the law here, and then the National Assembly passed it, and then Korean government cabinet also approved it. So now the law is here. However, inside the government, Finance Ministry and the Industry Ministry are aligning with one another against Environment Ministry, saying, these two ministries saying this law may not be implemented because they're not going to introduce the regulations to make the law implementable, saying that the whole idea is wrongly headed. And Environment Minister saying, look, we have the law passed, we got to get going on this. And the other two economic ministers saying, this is not going to work, this is not going to reduce as much of the emission to begin with. It will cause a lot of cost for the economy and result in reduction of jobs and reduction of Korean cars sales, domestic sales. So I don't remember this kind of seeing this kind of division inside the government.
Well, Korean car domestic sales you mentioned, but we're also hearing concerns about imported cars. I mean, we have been seeing a significant rise in the number of imported cars driving around Korea in recent days.
Right, exactly. And that's a cause of concern, at least in my mind here, because Korea is one of the major auto exporting country in the world. But now these ministers are saying that this new system, if implemented, will negatively affect Korean cars here. And it's, in the minds of those people advocate the cause of free trade. This sounds like protectionist argument. That's what they're saying here. And what's happening is, the chart that you saw on the screen previously, the bottom ones, especially hybrid cars and electric cars, we have some designs introduced by the foreign makers, and also cars with the lower size of CO2 emissions, which are diesel-fueled, smaller size cars that are being introduced by imported car makers.
A lot of European car makers have been going that direction.
Exactly. So they will get to enjoy this kind of incentive at the beginning. And those people who advocate this kind of new system is saying the whole idea about this system is to encourage Korean automakers to move away from the CO2 emitting cars into less of CO2 emissions. So this is an incentive system for them to make the move. But the advocates for the industry are saying this is going to benefit foreign makers, and then it's going to hurt Korean automakers. So they're saying this is not a good idea. So this is a kind of like traditional, typical Korean-style argument being made.
Well, I think so. Now, as the government tries to sort this out, do we see more delay or compromise?
The economic ministries are saying that we need a greater delay and maybe postponement of the whole delay and in the whole schedule. And environment ministry is saying, no, we have to go ahead with it. Korea is one of the top, soon to be a top 10 economies in the world. We have to set the example. Obama administration took a great pain to introduce introduce a new measure to boost the cooperation for climate change globally. And this year we're expecting big boost in the global stage. And Korea taking back steps just doesn't look good, they're saying.
Well, climate change, we're feeling it every day these days. Hail coming down, tornadoes happening here in this country. Definitely something that we need to take responsibility over. Exactly. All right, Dr. Kim Myung-ju, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
And that's your business today on this Thursday. Join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time.